Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be kicking off our busy season live sessions that we are kicking off with Iris this year. And we are going to talk about everything that concerns you throughout the busy season. Any questions you have, whether they are technical or practical, maybe how to approach things. We will be picking up topics depending on what you ask us for. Also, there is a comment section where you can actually ask questions or post any comments. Also, if you are tax expert or expert in any other areas within accountancy and would like to participate in our future sessions, please do get in touch as well. But this is your session, so hopefully you will enjoy it. And we'll dive straight in. So I'm delighted to be reunited with my very good friend, expert as well, Sharon Cooke, that she will be joining us today. I know it's not Jenny Stradwick. Jenny is not well at the moment, so she will join us in future sessions. So thank you very much, Sharon, for stepping in.
Thank you for having me, and I hope Jenny gets better soon.
Yes. So before we dive in, Sharon, would you mind introducing yourselves and 2020 Innovation?
Definitely. So hello, I'm Sharon Cooke, one of the technical directors at 2020 Innovation and a very good friend of Eva. And at 2020 Innovation, we do lots and lots of webinar training for predominantly accountants in practice, alongside a whole host of associated services, from practical tax resources to websites, social media, file reviews. If an accountant needs it, we hope to be providing it.
Thank you, Sharon. So busy season. Before we dive into technical, I think we are really in the midst of it. And to be fair, I don't miss this part of my previous life, professional life. But there have been some shocking statistics that have been posted recently. Recent CABA survey says that 8 out of 10 respondents says stress and poor mental health are a problem within the accountancy profession. And some of the reasons highlighted in this survey included heavy workload and long hours, which can cause burnout or stress during the tax season, because it's the sheer volume of work that we have to get through. Speaking to many accountants, sometimes 70-80% of their total tax returns have to be done within the 2 months period window. So it can be very, very intense. And the survey also revealed that 63% of accountants believe stress and poor mental health are a problem because of the complexity of the work with no room for error. Tight deadlines, client demands, and a lack of time make it difficult for accountants to manage and maintain a work-life balance. So, what does it tell you? There is really no room for error, right? We have to get things right first time, every time. Sometimes rules, regulations change so often. Sometimes even the interpretation of those can be a little bit, can have a little bit of ambiguity. So it can be a minefield for us. And then you add the extra workload on the top of that. So it's a perfect storm for you kind of to feel very much stressed. So I'm going to take advantage of Sharon's expertise today. And one of the few things that I know they are bubbling around and people keep asking is the basis period reform and the overlap relief. So Sharon, would you mind explaining what it is? And how
I'd be happy to.
So
basis, when we're thinking about busy season and the returns that we need to get done and submitted before 31st of January 2025, we're of course talking about 23-24 tax year returns. And that's when we're seeing the basis period reforms from Finance Act 2022, going back in time a little, first taking effect. So I'm sure everyone listening has been dealing with some of these basis period adjustments in the returns that we've been working on since April this year. But I suppose a particular point where time is ticking and having an impact on basis period adjustments is, as we go through this 2023-24 transitional year for basis period reform, we are needing to, for any of our unincorporated clients that are not on a 31st of March or 5th of April year end, we are needing to bring in standard profits and transitional profits to get us onto the new tax year basis. And one of the figures we need to do that transitional year calculation is any overlap profits that the client is holding. Now, sometimes we will just have that on the file. We will know how much overlap profit that individual has, but other times we don't know. Now, something that's been around for a number of months now is HMRC do have a facility where they will help agents ascertain the overlap figures for their clients. Now, to start with, when this facility was launched, accountants were getting responses back relatively quickly, within a couple of weeks in some cases. But of course, now as we're approaching 31st of January, demand for this information is going up and response times are taking longer. And sometimes the revenue aren't even able to say, here's the number. What they're saying is, we haven't got the number either, but here's some information that might enable you to work it out. So it's just a bit slower. So for anyone sitting in front of a computer, if we take a look at the last issue of HMRC's Agent Update, which was issue 125. So if we just did an internet search for Agent Update 125, we can see HMRC are talking about this overlap information service in that update. And what they are saying is two things in there really that are important. One is, if you are needing overlap figures for your clients, ask sooner rather than later. So ideally, we've already done it by now, but certainly if we've got any clients we still need that information for, let's get that in ASAP over the next week or so, I would say, to give us a chance of hitting the 31st of January deadline. The revenue is saying ideally do it by 31st of December, but I would say get it done ASAP. The other point that is really important and also links into the wider basis period transition adjustments we're doing is what the revenue is saying in Agent Update 125 is, if you cannot ascertain the overlap figure by 31st of January, estimate it and still file a return with that provisional figure. So filing the return on time is important, even if we have to use an estimated overlap figure. Now, so that's an important point to note, but there's a knock-on point, if I may carry on with my basis period thoughts for a little longer, Eva.
Please.
Provisional figures and estimated figures are very much part of this tax year basis regime for some, because we might not just be estimating overlap, we might be estimating elements of the profits or losses that we're bringing in to the 23-24 return, or indeed going forward on future returns. Now, where we are estimating profits or losses from an accounting period that didn't end during the tax year, we have a new set of rules for provisional figures. So historically, if we've used provisional figures in a return, the instruction has been we have to amend them and put them right as soon as possible once we have the accurate information. But when it came to estimating these profits or losses from future accounting periods, the revenue have said, as part of the basis period reform, those provisional figures can be corrected at the time we file the next year's return. So we haven't got to do them ASAP. But this overlap relief estimated figure is a normal provisional figure. So if we estimate overlap relief on a return, that estimate or provisional figure has still got to be corrected as soon as possible once we ascertain the correct figure. So balancing basis periods continues to be a little bit of a challenge.
It seems like a little bit of a headache.
Yeah, that's...
So if I'm an accountant and I want to find out through the HMRC helpline,
yes,
what information do I need to provide for my client, A and B? Do I need to act as an agent in order to get that information from HMRC?
I don't think you do. They do on their basis period agent pages, which you'll be able to get to via Agent Update 125. They do list out what you need to provide. And I also have a reference of it in front of me here. So what we need to provide to get the overlap figures are the name of the agent, if we are doing it as an agent, the name or description of the business address, the unique taxpayer reference, details of whether it's a sole trade or a partnership, the partnership's UTR, if it's a partnership, the date that self-employed business began, the most recent period of account, and the year or the years that the accounting period changed, which is realistically going to be the 23-24 tax year.
Okay. We'll make sure we'll post this summary after the session as well, because this is very useful. So when you come in on the call, then you have everything ready, everything prepared there. There's been a lot of noise about the recent budget, Sharon, and some changes in capital gains tax or inheritance tax and so on. How is tax planning important in this busy season? How it is important for us to consider for our clients? Is it more important than it was before, or can we wait until January?
Well, there are some steps that we can take with affected clients before 5th of April 2025. So on some of the presentations I've been delivering for 2020 Innovation, we've been talking about planning before the employer's NIC increases come into play, planning before the furnished holiday let tax advantaged regime comes to an end, and planning before the non-domiciled, again, tax advantage remittance basis regime comes to an end. So there are 3 particular changes that will take effect from 5th of April next year. And in addition, we've got the increase to business asset disposal relief taking effect from 5th of April next year, which effectively gives us a 4th category. So there are some changes that some clients might want to take action on now to make their overall tax position better. Now, there's no action that actively needs to be taken before 31st of January for anyone that is already in busy season, but it is still really important where possible to put some headspace into this, because just like that overlap profit relief point we've just been talking about, tax planning, clients, it all takes time, doesn't it, ever? And we're never, in February going to be able to say, right, you're planning to sell your business, let's now get that through before 31st of March. Just things take longer than that in most cases. Whereas there might be some other bits, just like if we look at employers' NIC, for example, one of the quite easy points that some employers can look at if they're in this position is, yes, they're going to pay more in employers' NIC from April 25. And there isn't really any planning that can be done to avoid that. But if that business is holding surplus cash, one of the suggestions that's come out from our wealth management partners, a business called Continuum, is a lot of companies or employers, they're not optimizing their rates of interest effectively on business accounts. So things like just holding their assets in the best platform for them and improving their returns on those monies, that can help subsidize the extra employer's NIC costs. So that's one of many things to think about. Now, something like that, we can perhaps be talking to clients about it after 31st of January. So it's a balance. But I think with those changes, so I just listed off 4, didn't I, being employer's NIC increases, furnished holiday let owners losing their tax advantages, non-resident individuals losing the remittance basis in some cases, and business owners paying more for gains on business asset disposals from April. For all of those, as with any kind of tax change, it's sensible to segment your client base down, identify who's going to be affected by what, and then start thinking about, okay, what sort of support might they need? What do we need to kick off with now, because it's urgent and these things take time? And what potentially can wait until after we've gone past the 31st of January rush? Or what can we incorporate with the communications we're doing with clients anyway over December and January as we finalise their 23-24 tax returns. Certainly if we're working with a furnished holiday let owner, it would be sensible to start then looking ahead to what's their position going to be from 25-26 and onwards.
Yeah, usually, and I think I'm in two minds about that, because this is the time that probably you will have time to spend face to face with your clients. So you kind of want to keep that momentum, and you want to relay all the important information to them as soon as possible. Because sometimes if you just send in letters, communications, that can get a little bit lost, between other mail. So yeah, I think there is a balance, right? As we said, having the headspace, which we are lacking in this busy season, but being that advisor, that kind of person that should be advising our clients and their businesses about what to do next, isn't it? So that's a combination.
Absolutely.
Is 2020 innovation, are you guys doing any training for the overlap relief or basis period that maybe?
Yeah, it's fair to say. So we obviously started this back when it was announced in a budget. That would have been back in 2021 sometime. And then as it came through to draft legislation, actual legislation, and now we're training on the practicalities of it. In fact, the last webinar that we did on it was with Rebecca Bennyworth, very well known in the tax profession. And we've got some tools, some calculators on it as well. And we carry on lecturing, and something that I think it serves as both a word of warning, but also perhaps a little bit of comfort. I find most practitioners are struggling with it. That when I do lecture, we are still getting a lot of questions coming in on some of the detail in the change, and there is a lot of detail there. There are special rules for dealing with losses. There are special rules if we look to change the accounting period. We've got tax planning incorporated in it. So there is, if we are accelerating profits in, there will in some cases be a default spread of those excess profits over a 5-year period, but we can elect to accelerate those profits. So when would we look to do that? Why would it be good to do that? There's a whole host of technical detail around basis period reform. It's not just entries on a return. Far from it. Indeed, even getting the entries on the return is more complicated than you'd think at a glance. So there's a lot there, and certainly for anyone that hasn't done basis period training in the last couple of months and is dealing with unincorporated clients with a year end of other than 31st of March or 5th of April, it is definitely worth doing some refresher training, because there are pitfalls that we don't want to fall into. Most practitioners are finding they need the refresher training. So it is worth either reading HMRC's update or looking back at previous course notes or booking on something new. If anybody does need anything, do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise, and I can suggest webinars that will hopefully help. But I think the main thing is just eyes open. Don't expect the returns to follow common sense. They don't anymore where basis period adjustments are concerned. Follow the guidance and you will get there.
Yeah, I definitely think refresher is needed, because it's not as simple and straightforward, and you can have so many possibilities there, right? So
absolutely, there's a lot. It's certainly one of the common areas, and we were talking before, Eva, that I go out and do tax file reviews as part of my role, and so we are seeing some sort of themes coming through in terms of common errors, and I think in terms of the root of mistakes that are made for tax, it comes right back to where you started today. And a lot of it comes back to time pressure and the experience of the people doing the work and the stress or the work environment that they're under. So I've been doing tax file reviews for 10, 15 years now. It's been part of my role for some time. And I've definitely noticed over the last couple of years that across the board, on average, in general, quality of tax work has dropped.
Why do you think that?
So I think again, you used the phrase earlier, perfect storm, and that describes this as well. So during the pandemic, trainees did still come into firms, but they didn't get the sitting with a colleague level of induction, with the level of training. So the support for the people that are doing the tax work now, when they started in practices a couple of years ago, was perhaps not ideal, because at that point we were all going, hey, how do we use Teams or whatever it may be? And just some of the practicalities of sitting and here is how we process a capital allowances comp in this firm. This is what it means. This is what it should look like. That didn't necessarily happen. So people were finding their way. And so we've now got those individuals that perhaps didn't get the same quality of training to start with, doing the work, combined with managers that perhaps didn't get training on how to be a manager. But more significantly, I think, people just, like you were saying, from your CABA stats, Eva, just overwhelmed. So managers have got less time to spend on files and are perhaps doing more of an overview review. And some of the mistakes that I find, they're what I'd call silly mistakes. They're avoidable mistakes, but they're not being spotted. Now, I can spot them because perhaps I'm spending a bit longer on the files than even the managers are. So we just need to keep eyes open. And I think basis periods will definitely be something that we're talking about in terms of common mistakes.
Yeah. I wonder, do you think after this kind of break-in year, will HMRC maybe double down on inspections after that, just to look how we've done it? I'm just kind of...
Well, it's the amount of tax involved with a single sort of self-employed business mistake is relatively small. But as we're seeing with Making Tax Digital and that whole initiative, when we take the whole self-employed community and add up small mistakes across the community, HMRC believe that is something worth putting attention to and trying to improve. So possibly, I suspect, Eva, it will come back to resources. Now, we heard in the budget they're getting an extra 5,000 staff, I think.
Yes.
And I'm sure closing the tax gap will be a priority. So I would think it will come up. And, you know, as we said before, they have overlap figures as an example. And where they could see variances in the overlap figures they were expecting to see relieved versus what's actually been declared on the return, I can imagine that sort of thing would certainly, if nothing else, trigger those one too many letters that HMRC send now. So they'll have a particular topic and they'll, again, segmenting their client base, segment their taxpayers to say this is a common error within that taxpayer community. Let's write to all of them and say, might there be something extra that you need to declare here? Here's some guidance, check your return and amend it if needed. And yeah, I would expect basis periods to be up there.
And then interest accrued and everything, right? No,
it can be. And there's we're going to see, that's with R&D actually, which I appreciate is corporate, but it seems we're going to go back to these voluntary disclosure facilities next year. Haven't seen mention of those for a while, but that's mentioned as part of the corporate tax roadmap for companies claiming R&D. So that's sort of the next step on top of a one-to-many letter, where one-to-many letters are saying you need to correct your affairs. Disclosure facilities are more, come to us, be upfront, put your tax errors right, and we will give you favourable interest and penalty rules if applicable. So yeah, the revenue are very much hoping that taxpayers will self-assess and correct their own position. But it all comes back to them giving enough information out to do so in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So, because you mentioned for that overlap relief. So say if there is a situation that HMRC doesn't have any figure or doesn't have basis. So how do you go about that in that case?
So then we need to look at, working it out. So one of the pieces of information that we need to get the overlap figures from HMRC is when the business started. So if we can identify when the business started and what was declared initially, so what the profits were of the first few years, we can retrospectively work out what the overlap profits, if indeed there were any overlap profits, that would have arisen were. Same if the business started before, was it 1997, when we had, when we went to current year basis and self-assessment in the first place, and we have transitional overlap figures coming through from there. So the revenue or the agent would need to try and work it out manually based on start date and profits in the first couple of years of trade, or around 1997, if applicable. It's not the easiest calculation, as I'm sure, you remember from being in practice with opening year rules and all of that good stuff.
That's the thing. So really then to prove that you're correct, you need really to be able to demonstrate the backup calculations.
Yeah. So we'd need schedules.
Having as a paper trail really for the that you've made decision. So you mentioned false review. So kind of we have 5 minutes to go, and maybe to make a little bit of light of it here. What are probably the top 3 silliest that made you laugh mistakes? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
I try not to laugh at tax mistakes too much, but some of them, it's so quite often it's capital allowances related, and again, that's something we're seeing addressed by the corporate tax roadmap, because the government are now saying we will keep things stable, which is all well and good if we keep the annual investment allowance stable at the £1 million now, and we keep for companies incurring brand new expenditure on qualifying items full expensing stable. But where I do see mistakes coming out, and will continue, I am sure, to see mistakes coming out, is the application of the super deduction that we had until April 2023. So we could only claim the super deduction for assets acquired before 1st of April 2023, and then the amount of extra, the super bit of the deduction that we could claim, varied according to what the actual year end was. So it was up to an extra 30%. So those calculations can and do go wrong. Whether or not expenses are eligible for the super deduction based on type, newness of the asset, or date of acquisition, that can and does go wrong. And actually it'd be really, really interesting if you know, Eva, to hear how Iris deals with this, because what I see quite a lot is agents struggling with recording their super deduction assets in their software, and the register of the assets that we've claimed the super deduction on is really, really important. And it's really, really important. And a general point to note when we've got a choice over annual investment allowance or full expensing or super deduction as it was, is the annual investment allowance, when we dispose of an asset on which the annual investment allowance has been claimed, we're simply deducting proceeds from a pool. But if we dispose of an asset on which we've claimed the super deduction, or now the full expensing regime, we must, if we've got proceeds, deduct that from a cost working for that individual asset. And what I am seeing companies do, because super deduction is corporates only, is we're seeing companies just claim on tens of thousands of expenditure called things like IT equipment. Now, hopefully with IT equipment, we're probably going to get scrapping, not proceeds at the end. But let's say we've bought a series of commercial vehicles. When we dispose of them in the future, we've got to be able to say at the point of disposal, did we claim the super deduction or the full expensing on this originally? And if we are not tracking this asset by asset, how would we know? So I anticipate a lot of what should be balancing charge calculations being missed or inaccurate in the future.
I'm just making notes because this will be good topic for discussion probably in our future sessions.
It'd be really good.
So I do know we recently launched the Iris Elements Tax Enterprise, where we have the asset register functionality. So it doesn't have to be done outside of the software.
Brilliant.
So I'll make sure, again, we'll educate our audience on that.
Sounds good.
What's possible. But yeah, absolutely. Then I think the only other thing is just tracking spreadsheet, but making sure they are up to date, right? And everything.
Yes.
So that can be a little bit tricky. Well, thank you. This is we already 29 minutes in. I never doubted we will have things to talk about, and it's always so fascinating to talk with you about stuff, because the way you explain it, Sharon, actually makes me feel that I'm not as stupid, because you explain it very well, so that I can.
I will never Nobody is ever allowed to call you stupid ever, not even you.
But no, thank you. This has been very good. Is there any last points that you want to leave? Any stressed, burned out accountant out there who is struggling? What would be your advice coming into December, January?
I'm not very good at practicing what I preach. Remember, we all commit to do this together. What people say is that rest makes us more productive. So when we're feeling busy and overwhelmed and like we have a million things to do, what we need to do at that point is stop and not do any of them and take that rest. We've been working with a business called Work Time Reduction Centre. They're based over in Canada, and they talk about working like lions, not working like cows. And what they mean by that is rather than constant grazing, have bursts of energy, go on the hunt and then rest, and then burst and then rest. And over the period of your working day, working week, that is more efficient and healthy to do so. So we need to stop grazing and start hunting.
Love that. Absolutely agree. What I used to do, and I kept that rule always, whenever it was tax return or set of accounts, I've always slept on it. So I would never do it and then send off to client. I always slept on it. And then when I woke up, sometimes I thought about other things. So yeah, absolutely. So working like lions, you said?
Yes.
Yeah? And always sleep on it. Probably
top tips. Now we just need to practice what we preach, Emma.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you to our lovely audience. The next busy season clinic will be on 17th of December at 12 o'clock, the same time. We will announce future guests very shortly. But for now, hopefully you will have some time to recharge, refresh, and wishing everybody all the best for this busy season. See you again soon. Thank you. Bye.